everyone, it's Talks with ChrisHappen.com. Thanks for watching and welcome back. Today we've got another Kickstarter preview for you, this time of a game called Byzantio. This is all based around the Byzantine Empire, where the king has passed on and ascended to the heavens. However, the king did not leave an heir. Therefore, it is up to you and your opponents to determine who is going to be the rightful heir to the throne. You can only do that by controlling specific strategic cities. But the challenge and the intrigue behind Byzantio is that each game is going to be different because you and your opponents are going to be picking the strategy and the cities that are going to mean the most to you and your empire. It is an area control and deduction game kind of combined together. It's an interesting take on those two methodologies, and it's very simple and easy to learn, but as you can imagine, it's hard to master, especially the fact that every game is going to be different with who is trying to achieve which objectives. Now that may sound confusing, but it's a very, very easy game to pick up. We're going to take a second and show you some of the materials that we were given. Please keep in mind this is a beta and prototype copy of the game, so this doesn't represent the final product you would get if you were to kickstart it or back it on your own. However, the artwork on the board is really, really good. It's actually one of the better boards that we've been provided in terms of doing previews and Kickstarter videos, so I'm really excited about that. I don't foresee it changing too much, and a lot of the artwork that you'll see here on the board is the same artwork that you'll see on the Kickstarter page as well, which we'll have links to below and in the corner of the video as well. But in the meantime, we're going to show you all of the different actions you could take on your turn, what it means to have a pretender to the throne, and what it means to have garrisons helping you secure your cities, and where all the intrigue comes in. So for now, let's grab our garrisons, let's grab our pretenders, and let's try to ascend to the throne in Byzantio. So here you see everything that comes with Byzantio. Now we have a beautifully rendered board that again is one of the better boards that's really ever been provided to us for a preview. And you'll see that there are different provinces and there are different cities. It's good to note that some provinces, like this province here, which is marked by its borders, actually has two cities in it. There are several that are like that. This is probably the more confusing one just because it's a little bit of an island, but it does have two on one province and then one on this, on Corinthus. The names are brutally hard to say, therefore I will probably slaughter them and I will apologize in advance for that. But in addition to the province areas, you see that there are 4 different shields, one for each player's pretender token. These are the pretenders to the crown, and each one starts in the same place every game. Now, in addition to the pretender tokens, each player is going to be given 10 garrison meeples, and these are going to be used to help you gain control of different cities and different provinces. But before you can do anything, and before you know what your actions are ahead of time, you need to plan out a strategy. And this is a big part of Byzantio. What you're going to do is you're going to be given a dynasty playmat or score tracker, and it's divided into 3 different areas. The top area has your cities, the middle area has your actions, and the bottom area has your espionage. The whole beginning part of the game sees you picking specific cities to put in each of these slots. Now there are victory points next to them if at the end of the game you control those cities. But this is done in secret from every player. So in a 4-player game, if I begin as the yellow player and I'm here in Hadrianopolis, and I decide that I want that to be my primary objective, my top city, I would write that down in secret here. I would then pick the remaining cities as well. Those are not primary objectives, but they are my top choices for my cities. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important when we get to espionage. At the end of the game, if your opponents are able to deduce, and they'll have 3 different cities that they could guess that could be your primary objective, if they're able to deduce from the course of actions that you take in the game what city you value the most, then they will get an additional 5-point bonus. So that means in a 4-player game, somebody could get 15 points just from deducing each other player's primary objective. So there's already a little bit of strategy and a little bit of planning. Now, you could potentially, for example, as the yellow player, choose all of these cities on this side of the board. However, if you decide to choose cities that are clumped together, somebody could easily start to pick out what your top priority is. Now, how are you going to gain control of these cities? If you've listed out 7 cities and you understand where your pretender is going to go to help you influence them, it's going to take actions to take control of cities and to also mess with your opponents and how they're taking control of cities. Now you'll see here in the upper left there are 6 actions. Throughout the game there's going to be 6 different distinct actions you can take on your turn. You'll notice around the left and bottom edge of the board there is a time track. Now in this we have little pieces of paper that denote specific events. These are always in the same places. You have the beginning of the game on turn 1. You have an earthquake on turn 2. You have famine, I'm sorry, I said turn 2. This is actually 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I believe. You have a famine, you have a successor to the throne, you have a plague, and then you have the end of the game. We'll talk a little bit about those in a second as we talk about how turns go on. But to begin the game, you're going to have 6 actions. Now you'll notice next to each of the descripted actions with the symbols, there is a number. There's 10 times for campaign, 4 times for negotiate, 3 times for bribe, there's 6 times for muster, there's 3 times for expel, and there is 4 times for advance. Those are the limits that you can do each of those actions per game. And if we look back at our Dynasty mats, you'll notice that you'll have the same symbols for each of those actions, as well as boxes that you will either check off or put the number of the round or number of the round that you completed them on. An easy way for me to show you this is to show you a used sheet. So for example here, this player on turn 1 used the muster action, and then on turn 2 they used the advanced action. This is really interesting. It felt a little like Clue at first, but what it does is it forces you to be able to remember all of your actions as well as be open to the rest of the board what your actions were. Because again, a big part of this game is deducing what the primary objective is of your opponent or your opponents. So while this piece is kept secret in the cities that you've chosen, this piece is kept face up so that people can see where you took what actions. Now you'll notice that there are X's in some of these. Why would I put X's in some of them? Well, as you progress through the game, turns are going to take place very simply. At the beginning of the game on turn 1, each player can take 1 action. So let's say we started with the yellow player, and let's say they decided that they wanted to garrison a unit here in Muster. They would take one of their units and put it in Hadrianopolis. Now remember, I as the yellow player know that that is a city that is my primary objective. None of the other players know that yet, but they do know that it may be important to me at this point. Then my opponents go. Let's say that the red player decided that they wanted to go over to Corinthus. You'll notice that there are these dotted seaways. When you move your pretender token, you are able to move to any adjacent bordering province or any province that's connected through a sea path. So I could use the advanced action, which just lets me take my character, my pretender token, and move them to another province. Then the blue player may be the one to go, and they decide that they want to expel immediately. Expelling, you'll notice, says to remove one of an opponent's characters. The black is an opponent's, the white is yours, at the roll of a die, and that's what the 8-sided die is for. So if I wanted to choose to expel someone's garrisoned unit, I could choose one that's on the board, so right now it would be this yellow one, and I would roll. Now on a 1 to 4 it would fail, on a 5 to 8 it would succeed. However, if you choose a garrison unit that is in the same province as a pretender token, then that person's pretender token and garrison unit get an additional bonus to the roll. So in this case, a 1 to 5 would fail, and a 6, 7, or 8 would succeed. So it's a risk. I could roll, and I would get a 6, and this guy would be expelled and go back to the opponent's stash or into their supply. You're only going to have 10 garrison units at total throughout the game. You may or may not have them all on the board by the end of the game, but you're going to have 10 to be able to use. So expelling them and moving them and removing them from the game is a very important thing. However, with expulsion, you can only do that 3 times in a game. So once the blue player had marked that off on their sheet, they could only do it 2 more times in the game. Then the blue player would go, and the blue player may say, I am decided also to campaign here, so he's going to get to move and add a garrison unit. So we showed you campaigning at the last there, which means that you can move your pretender token, which is this symbol with the shield. You can remove an opponent's garrisoned unit and add one of yours. So if, for example, when I moved my purple character there, if the pretender token moved in and there was already an opponent's token there, not only could I place mine, but I could remove theirs and take it back to their supply. Campaigning is a big one because you have 10 different times throughout the game you can do it. However, not every time you do it is going to result in removing someone else's garrison unit off the board. There could be times when you do it simply to move your pretender and be able to add one of your own garrison units. Now, negotiating. Let's talk about negotiating for a second. Negotiating is interesting because it's something that you could agree to switch with an opponent. Let's say the expulsion failed. And let's say turn 1 is done. So everyone has taken their turn and we move the time marker forward to the second round. If on the second round the yellow player decides, I would like to switch this garrison unit with this garrison unit, they can make an offer to the purple player. If the purple player chooses, they can say yes, and they would simply be exchanged from province to province. Now, why would you do that? Well, it's a great way if you target a city away from your pretender to switch and move a garrison into that city to gain control. As you can imagine by now, when you're scoring at the end of the game, it's going to matter as to who has the most units in a city to be able to score it. But let's say as the purple player I decide, you know what, no, I don't want that. I don't want my garrison unit over there. So I'm going to refuse the negotiation. If they refuse, then the yellow player would roll a die. Now, on a 1 to 4, it would fail. On a 5 to 8, it would succeed. And as all rolls go in the game, if the pretender tokens exist in the same province that are being targeted, they get +1s. In this case, they cancel each other out. So, we're going to go ahead and roll. We'd get a 1, it would fail, and our players and our garrisons would stay in the same spot. The final one that we haven't talked about is bribery. Let's say the yellow player at the beginning of turn 2, instead of deciding to do a negotiate and flip, he decides that he wants to bribe this garrison unit. This is not something that the player, that is the purple player, can refuse. It's essentially down to a die roll. Now, again, the pretender token is here, so this person's going to get a +1. So normally a 1 to 4 would fail and a 5 to 8 would succeed, but in this case a 1 to 5 would fail and a 6 to 8 would succeed. So we're going to go ahead and roll the dice. We would get a 4 and we would fail, so nothing would happen. We would check it off on our sheet and be done and good to go. But let's say we got a 7 and succeeded. If that's the case, the yellow player has successfully bribed this garrison to come to his aid, and it's replaced with a yellow garrison, and the purple garrison would go back to the supply of the purple player. Now that is very powerful as well, but you can only do it 3 times per game. So part of the challenge inside of Byzantio, aside from just deducing what your opponent's primary objective is going to be timing your actions at the right specific moment to gain the best advantage for you. There are some times that you're going to be campaigning purely to move. There's going to be some times where you negotiate simply to throw people off the scent. So there's a lot of different things that are going to be happening throughout the game from these actions. Now, as each turn happens, this time track progresses 1 round forward and forward. So you may be asking yourself at this point, what are the point of the numbers on the board? They're not having to do anything with scoring. They actually have to do with the events that are going to happen at set times around the game. In round 6, we're going to have an earthquake. In round 12, we're going to have a famine. In round 18, there's going to be a succession of the patriarch. And in round 24, there's going to be a plague. Now, 3 of the 4 can be very bad. Between an earthquake, a famine, and a plague, depending on the die roll, could potentially take characters off the board. They're going to happen in different forms and different ways, but they could be as simple as rolling 1 die to determine what province is going to be affected. So if I were to roll a 1, everyone that had a character on a province with a 1 would be affected by an earthquake. It could be a multiple series of rolls as well to determine where the incident happens and then what type of unit could be affected. The most important one to me, though, is the succession of the patriarch. Now, the succession of the Patriarch allows you a very interesting moment in time. At this point in the game, it's round 18. There's going to be characters all over the board. There's going to be people interacting, there's going to be people throwing people off the scent. All different types of actions are going to be happening. But maybe by round 18, I've determined as a player, my Hadrianopolis city is no longer my primary objective, and I want to change the primary objective I have. At that point, I can cross out my primary objective, or I can cross out any of my other cities and replace it with a new city. So let's say late in the game I decided that Nicaea is going to be one of my objectives, and I want to cross out one of these 10-point cities. If I did that, basically what's going to happen, in this case I'll show you one from a player that did that, they crossed out one city and put in another one. Now they really should have put the name down here. But what that means with this -2 is that if you change your city or your primary objective, if you gain control of that at the end of the game, you're going to get 2 points less because you did choose it later in the game. However, this is a heck of a way to throw people off the scent, and it's a really good time in the game because so many actions have been completed and you only have so many left to finish before the end of the game. It is part deduction, it is part area control, it is part combat. Even though there isn't any combat quote-unquote per se, the most combat you're going to be having is bribing and changing and removing figures, expelling figures, or doing a campaign and removing people from the game and adding your own. At the end of the game, you're going to look at who has the most garrison units in each of the provinces as to who controls the cities. Now, one key thing we haven't talked about, you're not allowed to just stack up a bunch of your garrison units in one province. You can only have a maximum of 2 garrisons in one province of your own color, and a maximum of 4 garrisons total in a province between all colors. In addition, you cannot add another garrison until an opponent's garrison is in that city with you. So if this red player had made it to Hadrianopolis and added one of their own character garrisons in, then the yellow player could potentially do a muster and add a second unit to that province as well. Now at the end of the game, the pretender tokens do not count towards anything in terms of scoring for the provinces. So at the end of the game, this Hadrianopolis city inside of this province would be 2 for the yellow, 1 for the red, and the yellow player would have control of that. It is a very interesting game and a very interesting deduction piece that gets thrown into this aside from just the area control as well. Now you may be asking yourself, well, what if it's not as simple as 2 to 1? What if it's 2 to 2? Well, if a player has the most garrison tokens in the objective city, then they're in control of that city and they receive the full amount of points. But if 2 players tie for control of the city, then each receives half of the amount that corresponds to it. Now what that means is, let's say the yellow player had Hadrianopolis as their #1 city, but let's say the red player had it as their final city. Well, that means that the yellow player only gets 7 points and not 14, and the red player only gets 3 points, not 6. So just because they tied doesn't mean they don't get any points. They would still get points, it would just be split. Now what happens in a 3 and 4 player game? In a 3-player game, if 3 players are in control of a city, then they each receive 2 points for that city. And in a 4-player game, if all 4 players have 1 garrison token in that city, then the players receive no points. We've played 4-player games where the last 1 or 2 moves ends up being someone placing a 4th garrison unit into a city or into a province, and that will just completely mess people up. Now, I may have confused you with one thing, and I want to make sure I'm clear on this. When you're putting people into provinces and putting them into cities, you're putting them into the actual cities, not into the province. So in a province like this that has 2 cities, you could have at most 1 of each color, or 4 total in Nicaea, and 4 total in Dorylaeum. I think that's how you say it. So this could get very crowded very quickly and could really throw people off depending on who's fighting for what city in that province. So at the end of the game, when you're determining control of everything, it comes down to how many of your garrison units are in each of the cities. But when you're dealing with each of the events that happens around the game, the province number affects all the cities in that province. That's Byzantio. It sounds complicated at first, but it is very simple to pick up once you learn the 6 actions and learn where you are plotting to take your pretender in hopes that they will become the one to gain the crown. At the end of the game, it's very simple. The person who's scored the most points based on the cities that they had marked down is going to be the winner. So that's Byzantio. Byzantio is very interesting. It's the first game in a long time that has actually intrigued me in terms of the mechanics pulling it all together. Most games that I play, I feel are like other games. And when I look at them and I think, okay, this one reminds me of that, or this one reminds me of that, the games that they remind me of have the same type of mechanics. What Byzantio does is take 2 different mechanics that really have not been put together in a very long time that I can think of, and does them in a very, very good way. It takes the area control and the territory style of a Risk or a war game and pulls in intrigue and espionage and deduction in a way that keeps every game fresh and every game new. Now, we have played 2, 3, and 4 players with this game. What I have found personally is that in a 2-player game, there is the propensity, depending on how each player lays out their strategy, to really not interact with each other. While the board looks very big, the board is really only about maybe 2/3 of the board, because you have a large portion of it reminding you about what the actions are up here. But in a 2-player game, we have found at times, not in every game, but at times, that there would be one person with a pathway going one direction and one person with a pathway going the other direction, and that can force you into a position where there's not a lot of interaction. It's still fun, and that still varies and depends on each person picking completely opposite sides of the maps for strategy, but it can happen from time to time in a 2-player game. We have found the most fun to be in a 3-player game. A 4-player game is very fun, but there is a lot of interaction in a 4-player game. We feel that the best pacing is in a 3-player, but we have enjoyed it across all 2, 3, and 4 players. The other thing too is that while the city names may be a little hard to say, we have found younger players have enjoyed this very much because it is very simple. You only have a set number of actions. Those actions are the same every time you perform them, and the only different outcome that could happen is based on the roll of a die. So teaching it to younger players may take a little longer, but they were able to pick it up as young as 7 years old. In our house, we had a 9-year-old play it and pick it up as well. So it is something that is capable of being taught to younger kids as well. Now, in terms of the interaction, like I had mentioned, in a 2-player game, there tends to be at times not as much. But when there is interaction, it's a lot of fun. Every move that a pretender makes, or every roll from a bribe, or every potential campaign is going to affect what you're going to do on your next turn. So there's a lot of engagement paying attention to what other players are going to do on their turn. But more importantly, you have to pay attention to what they do because you're trying to deduce their primary objective. That was the most fun we have had in a long time playing a game, because there's a lot of subterfuge. There's a lot of times where you're going to move a character. You may move your pretender somewhere and add a garrison to a city that you don't even have on your list, purely because you want to throw people off the scent of your trail and what's most important to you. There's a little bit of deduction, a whole lot of guesswork, a whole lot of bluffing, and it's all wrapped in a really fun package. And plus the fact that a 4-player game can move as quickly as 45 minutes to 60 minutes once people are familiar with it, you can play this multiple times in a night and never feel like you're playing the same game twice. The other thing that we like is that just because the 4 pretenders start in their areas that are marked on the map, doesn't necessarily pigeonhole you into a specific strategy or into a specific area of cities. One game we played, which was extremely fun, was the purple player, who starts down here, picked one of the cities all the way on the opposite side of the map as their primary objective. And they slowly made their way around the map. Now, it wasn't until the end of the game that someone started to think, well, wait a minute, maybe they're throwing us off completely over here, and this was where one of their cities was. It was their primary objective. But it was a brilliant move in how it was played out. So just because the pretenders start in a specific area doesn't necessarily mean they're going to stay there, and doesn't necessarily mean they're going to congregate all their garrisons around that one area. The other thing that I really liked about Byzantio in our gameplay was the set track or the time of each turn and how everything was able to be planned for. You knew there was going to be an earthquake every game at the same time. You knew there was going to be a famine. You knew that there was going to be death. You knew there was going to be things happening at certain times that you could plan for. But even though you could plan for them, the roll of the dice still ended up determining what was going to happen at that moment in time. So overall, the timing was very well paced. In fact, when I first read the rules and I saw that there were 30 turns, I rolled my eyes and I went, oh my goodness, this game is going to take forever. But it moves very quick because every turn you're only allowed one action. So there's 4 actions in a 4-player game on each turn, and then you move down on a time marker and you get closer and closer to impending events that are going to impact the gameplay. Overall, I have really enjoyed my time with Byzantio. We've been able to play very quick games in 2-player games, a little bit longer games in 4-player games, and every single person that we have played with, gamer, non-gamer, war gamer, non-war gamer, strategy gamer, more tactical gamer, young and old, everyone has enjoyed this game, save for one person, and that was my wife, Mrs. Tox. Because I really kind of abused the rules on the first game we played, and I pushed her a little bit in one direction and started making her think I was going another direction, and I think her total experience of my deceitfulness just completely threw it off for her. But she did say that it did remind her quite a bit of Risk, and that she did like that. I think she had more of a issue with me and the way that I played than her and the game itself. But that's one of the fun things about Byzantio. This game is going to feel a little like poker, a little deceit, a little espionage and intrigue, and a lot like a strategic war game with you trying to capture each individual area. The fact that there's really no combat, though, other than the campaigning and removing people and putting your own garrisons down, there's no real direct combat per se. It does still give you a little bit of a scratching the itch for a war game perspective as well. Overall, we really did enjoy Byzantio. If it's something that you think would interest you, you can check out their Kickstarter project. We've had a link below in the corner of the video, as well as there are links in the video description. You can feel free to check it out. I believe at the moment that we are filming this, it is actually already funded, which is great, and congratulations to them. We're looking forward to seeing the final copy of this and being able to put it through its paces as well. But for now, we've definitely enjoyed Byzantio. We'd like to thank the project owners for providing us a copy of this to review for you. And we hope that you've enjoyed this review or preview. Let us know your thoughts. Feel free to leave your comments below on the YouTube channel. Of course, you can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Google Plus by searching Crits Happen, or you can find us at our homepage at critshappen.com. But until we see you next time, we hope you enjoy all of your land-grabbing, deceitful time inside the world of Byzantio. Thanks so much for watching. Keep rolling those dice, and we hope they're all crits.